Hello everyone, my name is Lydia and welcome. Today we're going to be painting Belt of Venus, and we're going to be doing this using the impasto style of painting. And impasto simply means a thick layer of paint, very similar to Vincent van Gogh's Starry Night. This is going to be a very quick painting, a really easy painting that anybody can do. And I'm going to be using a small canvas, of course, but you can always upsize this to any size canvas that you want, any type of canvas that you want. As usual, I'll go over the materials that you need to do the painting, and I'll also list those materials in the description box below. And I'll also provide a photo of the final painting on my Instagram account, Lydia Pangborn Art. So today, instead of grabbing your brushes and your paints, you're going to be grabbing your palette knives and your paints, and something to stay hydrated, of course. For me, it's ice water since it's over 90 degrees today here, and I'll meet you back at the easel. For my painting today, I'm going to be using a 9x12 inch stretched and primed canvas. This canvas is an old canvas that I painted a coat of gesso, and I just really gave it one coat of gesso because the paint is going to be on this so thick that you won't be able to see anything underneath it. We only need a few items today. We won't need brushes or water or anything like that today. What we're going to be using is a couple of palette knives. So I'm using one palette knife that's pretty long here. So it's, I guess, maybe about 2.5 inches long. And then I have this other one that's maybe about 1.5 inches, and it comes to more of a slight point than this one does. And you can get these in a pack at your arts and crafts store. I have old ones that are metal ones, but I just wanted to show you that you don't need a whole lot of materials. You don't need to spend a lot of money to have a nice, simple painting. You're also going to want to have an old cloth. You can use paper towels, but you'll end up going through a whole bunch of them because we're going to be constantly wiping the couple of palette knives we have off. I'm going to list the colors that I'm using down in the description box, but I'll go ahead and call them out. So I'm using primary magenta, cobalt blue, burnt sienna, phthalo green in the blue shade, cadmium orange medium, yellow ochre. As my white today, I'm going to be using gesso, and this is just a tub of gesso I got from Jerry's Artorama. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is I've got some gesso that I just used my smaller palette knife to pull out of my bucket, and then I'm going to be mixing this gesso with some of my cobalt blue, and I want this to be a lighter blue. I don't want it to be too dark down at the horizon, so I'm going to start from the bottom of my horizon up. And I'm going to add just a tiny, tiny bit of my primary magenta. And I'm just going to make sure this is all mixed up very well. And I want to make sure I have quite a bit of it mixed up. And that's the thing, we're going to be using quite a bit of paint. And if you notice, this paint here, my Cobalt Blue, is more of a heavy body. You can see how it, when you pull it out of the tube, it stands on its own almost. And this, I happen to have my magenta, this primary magenta. It happens to be more of the softer body paint. It is not student grade, but it is softer body. So you can even use softer body paint with this if you have gesso. You can also use a light modeling paste if you wanted to do that. And so once I have some of that paint mixed, I'm going to decide where I want to start the base part or the bottom part of my sky. And it doesn't matter if it's a little uneven on the horizon because we can fix that later on. I'm not worried about that right now. But I'm going to come up maybe, so if this is my halfway point, I'm going to come about halfway down from that. And I'm just going to start to put some of this paint on. So I'm picking up quite a bit of paint on the tip of my palette knife. And I'm just going to start to work this in, and I'm tapping it on. And the thing about this is you want to tap it on and just leave it. So you're going to get those nice sort of those nice lifted peaks in your paint. And I think I'm going to take this up. I want to decide how far, probably maybe about 1.5 inches to 2 inches with this color. That's why I want to make sure I have quite a bit of it. And it's going to take a while for this paint to dry, so I have quite a bit of time to work with it. And I'm just picking up a bit large, just large globs, large amounts of paint and putting it on the back of my palette knife. And I'm just lightly just tapping it down on my canvas here. So I want to make sure both of my palette knives are nice and wiped off from the blue color. And I'm going to go back to my smaller palette knife, and I'm going to get some of my gesso up here, and I'm going to start to mix in more of the magenta. So I want mostly magenta now. If a little bit of blue comes into it, it's okay, but I want it to be more of my magenta color. Put that right in there and get it all mixed up. I'm going to put that down. Then I'm going to go back to my larger palette knives. We're just switching back and forth between those two. And I'm going to go a little bit of, I'm going to get quite a bit of paint. And I'm going to go, I want to go above where my blue is. And I'm just going to start to put this in. And just press it down a little bit into that blue. And we're going to get that mixed in a little better in just a minute. So I'm just getting it down. If you go down into the blue a little bit right now, it's okay. I'm just continuing to work this all the way across, just the way I did the blue. And when I load this up, I'm really just scraping all this paint off, and I'll probably have to mix up a little bit more of this magenta, this lighter magenta color. I'm not gonna make this band quite as wide, so I'm gonna maybe have this color maybe about an inch or so, a little bit more than that maybe. I'm gonna wipe the paint off of my palette knife. And then I'm gonna start to, you can either pull down or up or both, but I'm gonna start to work to blend where these two colors meet. I'm just gonna start to do a little pulling down and a little pulling up. Just to work them together. Okay, so now that we have those two blended together, I've got both of my palette knives wiped off again. And I've got, now on my palette, I have my burnt sienna. I brought over a little bit of that primary magenta and then some of my gesso. And I'm gonna use my more pointed palette knife to mix up a nice, it's gonna be more on the light side for burnt sienna. And burnt sienna is almost kind of an orangey color. You can see how it turns a really pale color here. And I'm just gonna add a little tiny bit of my magenta to it. It comes somewhat peachy. And then I'm gonna switching over to my other knife, and we're doing the same process. I'm gonna make this band a little narrower, so I don't want it as wide as these two bands. So I'm gonna come in, and again, I'm just gonna scrape up my paint, and I'm just gonna start to put it just above this color here. Just tapping it on. So this is probably maybe about, I guess maybe about not quite an inch. So now that I've got that there, I'm gonna wipe my palette knife off a little bit, and I'm just gonna start to do the same process. I'm just blending these two together where they meet. You can pull down, you can pull up, however you want to work it. Okay, so now with my clean palette knife, I just got some gesso, and we're going to do this final part at the very top of the sky. Bring in some blue and some of the green. So I put some of this green out. This is the Pthalo Green blue shade. So I want this really nice, almost like a turquoise, a really light turquoise sky color. All right, I'm liking that. All the residual off of my palette knife. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna start to work right above where I put down the lighter burnt sienna color and start to work all of this the rest of the way up. So if I have to mix some more, that's fine. I'm just going to see how far this goes. And it's the same process we've been doing the whole time. And again, I'm just tapping it on. We are going to do a little bit of just a really light touch of bringing this all together with a little light blend. So now that we have the good coverage up here of this color, I'm gonna make sure I wipe my knife off, and I'm gonna start to do the same process. Now for this one, I don't want too much of this burnt sienna to go into the sky. I just want it to go a little bit. So I'm just gonna pull down right where they meet. So I'm just tapping in to blend them together in just that area where they meet. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to wipe this palette knife off again. So we're doing a lot of wiping, like I said. And however you're cleaning your palette knife, you want to have the napkin, the cloth nearby, because we're just going to keep wiping as we move down. So I'm going to start to, I'm not going to blend it completely, but I'm going to start to create areas where it goes together better. So we're going to still see some of those brush strokes, but it's like I'm putting some maybe frosting on a cake. We're still going to see a lot of these strokes that went on, and you certainly could leave it the way it is if you want, but I'm just going to work to give it some areas where it flattens out a little more. There we go, and I'm going to wipe my knife. And then I'm going to come down to where I have that burnt sienna, light burnt sienna color. And that's a really small band. I don't want to blend it too much into my blue here. Get my knife wiped. So I'm continuing to wipe, so I don't want them to come together too much. And then I'm wiping and I'm going down. And I'm just going to start to give that a little bit more of a blend there. And then I'm wiping and I'm coming in and I'm doing the same thing for this magenta. We'll still be able to see quite a few brush strokes. And then finally for the blue. This is why it's good to stand back about 6 feet from your painting and get that look from a distance, to see what it looks like from a distance. Because up close, it looks like a bunch of brush strokes. In a little while, it's going to look even more like a landscape painting. I know it doesn't look a whole lot like a landscape painting right now. I'm going to bring this down a little more. So we have the top part done. If you want to continue to work yourself to make it even more smooth so some of those brush strokes are out of it, you can. But I really like having a lot of that when I'm doing this type of painting, have a lot of that, those lifts in the paint. So I'm gonna go ahead and clean off my palette knives so we can go ahead and start working on this bottom part. So now that we have our sky established, we're gonna go ahead and put a little bit of our landmass down here. So I have on my palette now, I have my gesso, I have some more of my burnt sienna, some more of my magenta, primary magenta, and I've added my cadmium orange and a couple piles of yellow ochre. I'm gonna start by mixing up yellow ochre with a hint of orange in it and coming along this back area here. And I am gonna start below, but then start to blend it up. And we're gonna have a tree line that will establish our horizon. As I move forward, I'm gonna add a bit more of the burnt sienna still with the orange, maybe even a little bit of that magenta, and then burnt sienna mostly along these little corners down here. So we'll see how it goes. So I'm going to start with some gesso pulled into my yellow ochre. And I'm going to pull in some of that orange. And maybe even a drop of this magenta. And now I'm going to pick up my longer knife. And I'm just going to, once I've got some on my knife, I'm going to come down here. And I'm just going to start to do the same thing. It's all the same process, just tapping that paint in. And I can start to blend it, but I'm not going to do that right now. So if I get any of that blue, I'm going to wipe that off right now. Just going to try to stay below that for right this minute. There we go. I really want to establish my horizon with my trees in just a little bit. But I am going to take this ground up a little higher into that in just a minute. So if I accidentally hit the blue right away, I'm just going to wipe my palette knife off until I get all of this line across, and then I'm going to work to blend them out a little more. Okay, so I'm gonna wipe my knife clean, get all that paint off. And then I'm gonna take this and I'm just gonna pull it up just a little bit, right up into that color at the base of my sky. And that yellow and the blue is going to start to make a little bit more of a lighter green color. And I'm going to go ahead and just start to maybe tap out. And it's going to be difficult to pick this greenish, that this is turning a little green up on the camera, but this is where we're going to work to establish a bit more of a tree line right in here. All right, so I'm going to wipe my palette knife clean. And now I'm going to start to pull in a little bit more of the burnt sienna along with this yellow ochre, some of my gesso. I'm going to pick up a little bit more orange this time. And I'm not going to get as much of my magenta, so I'm not going to pick up any magenta this time. And I'm going to start to work that down below here. I'm just going to tap that in. And it's not a whole lot different, but it is a little bit more on the orange and sienna side. And I'm just going to go straight across with this color now. And then as I come more forward, I'm going to mix even more of the burnt sienna into this mix, make it a little darker. A little bit of the white. A little bit more of the orange. And I'm scraping across, and I'm just going to start to work all of that in as well. Okay, so what I'm going to do now that I have that covered is I'm going to wipe my palette knife off, and I'm going to go back through one more time before I add my tree line and the little, I mean, you can decide whether you want it to be a sunset or a sunrise, but we're going to add the little dot of sun in. So I'm going to go back through one more time and just maybe just kind of, now that it's got a little bit more time to set, maybe just one more time, just come in and just hit some places. So again, just one color at a time, where maybe I want to give it a little bit more smooth, a little bit more of that blending, just a little bit. I'm not going to do too much through there. Wiping my palette knife each time, coming back in. So there's just so much paint, it's going to take a while for this paint to dry to be able to pick it up off the easel. So it's probably, I usually let it sit for a few days before I move it, and then it's going to sit probably for another week before anything can happen with it. And then I'm going to come in and I'm going to do the same thing down here. Make sure I get all that color off my palette knife and just start to work to maybe clear out some of those. Okay, so now we're ready to add a little bit of our tree line. But I'm gonna wipe everything dry and I'm gonna get my next set of colors out, which are gonna be the Phthalo Green, the Cobalt Blue, and a little bit of the yellow ochre with the white. Okay, so for my tree line, I did put that in without hitting record, but we're going to go ahead and I'm going to show you how I did that because there's a few spots I really want to work on anyway. So for the lighter green, you can see the lighter green in there. I mixed a little bit of my Phthalo Green with my Gesso, and I added a drop of the yellow ochre. So it's Phthalo Green with a drop of yellow ochre and some of my Gesso, or some of the Gesso. And it creates kind of a minty, yellowy green. And I'm using the smaller brush, the one that I've been mixing my paints with mostly, because I want that little tip. And when I go to put this on, I'm leaning into it. I'm not smashing straight into it. You want this to be a very light touch because all of this is still wet. It's probably going to take a little time to dry. So what I did is I came in and I established, so this helps me establish my horizon. If you recall, it was a little off, a little crooked, but this helps me. And I want to cover up all of my blue, that purple blue that's back there, because I really want to keep that as part of my painting. But I just came in and I would want to make sure I get just enough paint just on the tip this time, that very top tip of the brush. And then I can hit some of those lighter greens in. Now what I can do is I can go in and get some, and I don't have to wipe my palette knife off if I keep calling this a brush. I am sorry, but I'm going to mix up some Cobalt Blue. Now this is mostly Cobalt Blue with maybe about a quarter of much of that yellow ochre, because I want this to be a darker, cooler green. And I'm just going to tap that in. And I don't want to cover up all of my lighter green color that's there. And this is the green that I can use to establish a straighter line on the horizon if I need to, and just work that up. So that's all I did. I wanted to make sure I didn't leave you out on that. And there you go. So you have a variation of the dark green and the light green there. Okay, so before we move on to some final touches on the painting, I'm going to clean off my palette knife. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my sun off center, maybe halfway between the side and the center over here, about right here. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to get some of my gesso, pure white, and I'm going to have some of the paint on the tip, and it's just a very light touch. And I'm going to work to make a nice little, you don't want too much paint because you want to be able to control making that circle. I'm just picking up a little bit at a time, making a little circular motion myself as I place this on. There we go. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick up a little bit of this orange, mix in some of my gesso. I want it to be a little bit on the lighter orange side. So it looks about like that. And then I'm going to scrape that onto just the tip. And on the outer edge, I think I'm just going to touch that just a little bit. So I'm barely touching it all on that outer edge. And I wiped my brush clean. And I'm just going to go around these edges there. I feel like it got out of control. My paint is still wet. And I can straighten that up a little bit. I wiped my knife clean a little bit. I'm going to add a little bit more white to this side to make it a little more round. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add little highlights down through here. So I want like maybe a little lighter yellow orange colors through here, and maybe even some dotting up into the belt itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a little bit of my yellow ochre and mix it in with my white first. And I want this to be a really, really yellowy color here, but not too dark. There we go, like that. Kind of a wheat looking yellow, but I'm going to add a touch of my orange to it. And this color, I'm just going to tap down. And I'm barely touching the canvas because there's a lot of paint. I don't want to pull paint up. And I'm just going to kind of tap it down into the areas. And it's to give the impression that maybe some of this light from the sun is still enough to maybe hit below where it is. And it'll bring your eye maybe a little bit more up into the sun that's there. And then I'm going to wipe my knife off and pull in some orange into that white, so just the orange. Add a little peachy color here. And I'm just going to start to tap that in, maybe around in some of these areas below the blue, but into the band, what would be that more lighter burnt sienna and magenta color, just to tap that in. And maybe even out a little bit here. And maybe even down into this lower area a little bit, like that. And then maybe even have some of that color just barely tapping into some of the trees. So you're given that impression that maybe some of the light is hitting back here, below where that sun still is. So it's just dripping the light down. Maybe even touch it up there just a little bit. So maybe bring it into that blue a little more. I'm gonna add just a little bit. I'm gonna take some of this yellow ochre, just the yellow ochre, just a little tiny bit, and maybe hit that in here as well. Just barely. A little bit more of the orange. And then I'm going to take a little bit of this, I got a little bit of burnt sienna in my orange, and I'm going to mix those together. And I want to put these orange splashes of color, maybe some down in the corner over here. So I'm just tapping some of that in on each corner. So I'm just picking it up right on the tip of the brush like I've been doing the whole time. And I didn't really add any white to this at all. So I'm just getting a little bit of that orange and burnt sienna right down in these corners a little bit. I may even just take some of the orange only and maybe pop that in around the bottom here. Maybe even underneath where that sun would be, just popping some orange colors in. So it gives you a feeling that either the day is just beginning or the day is ending, and there's all these nice little colors. I may even take a little pure orange and just pop it around as well. Just a little bit. Okay, there you go. And I'm not going to sign this because I have to let it dry before I sign it. I will come back in once it dries and show you what it looks like and even back up and get close to it. But I want it to dry first. I really like how it turned out. You can always go back in if you see areas within this painting once it dries. You can do the same technique, and maybe there's something about it when you do your painting that you don't like. Maybe you wanted to have this magenta color a little bit more expanded and you didn't at the time, but you can always go back and work on top of it. That's the great thing about this painting, and you don't have to worry about washing brushes and worrying with water. Thank you for keeping me company today. I hope you had as much fun as I did and created something special for yourself. Until next time, bye-bye.